Hey, what's going on, gang? This is Nate on the Stone. Welcome back to my channel. And this week we are talking about the destruction of art and why that is kind of a big deal. Yale University is one of the most prestigious in the country. Founded in 1701, it has the weight of historical continuity behind it. That, plus the fact that its acceptance rate is only 6%, and the fact that it is ranked as one of the top 10 universities in the country, and the fact that it boasts such people as Nathan Hale, Benedict Arnold, Eli Whitney, John C. Calhoun, John Kerry, George W. Bush, Stacey Abrams, Clarence Thomas, and even some entertainers like Edward Norton and Jennifer Connelly as alumni. People scramble to get into Yale. And if you are actually one of the lucky chosen few to actually be accepted to Yale, you are practically guaranteed to get your money's worth of education, which is a really good thing because an academic year at Yale for a full-time student will set you back about, $71,000. That is, Yale was a good place to invest in your education, but like so many other institutions in American education, Yale traded in its motto, Lux et Veritas, light and truth, for wokeness, with the latest example being the art department axing its Introduction to Art History, the Renaissance to the Present, from the course catalog. The class had been offered at Yale for decades and was actually quite famous in academia, for one reason because true luminaries would teach it, such as the late great art historian Vincent Scully. The course is being canceled not because the art department or the university as a whole was having problems getting students to take it every semester, but because students and faculty raised concerns that the class was creating an idealized Western canon, i.e., one that was too white, too male, too European. As such, after the spring 2020 semester, the Introduction to Art History, Renaissance to the Present Age will no longer be offered at Yale. And even during its final run in this academic semester, the course is only going to be a shadow of its former self. According to Yale Daily News, Dr. Tim Berenger, the professor who's going to be teaching this course for the last time, is going to have his class consider art in relation to questions of gender, class, and race, as well as art's involvement in Western capitalism and its relationship with climate change. In addition, Dr. Berenger is going to have his students write essays where they nominate a piece of art that has been left out of the Western canon or their textbooks in order to challenge long-held assumptions and narratives about Western art. And let me see. Problematic gender, class, race, capitalism, climate change narratives. Yep, looks like all the buzzwords are there. There are several problems right off the bat that are plain for everyone to see, even if you're like me and have no experience in art history. For one thing, ideas of gender, class, and race were different back in 1300. They were different in 1800. They were different in 1900. Heck, they were different in 1970 than they are today in the all-encompassing and oppressive now. Which makes it sound like, to me at least, that the facts of art history, those things that these students are paying thousands upon thousands of dollars to learn, are being retrofitted to fit theories rather than theories reformed to fit facts. Plus, why would students who have absolutely no experience in art history, because if they did, they wouldn't be taking an intro class about art history, write an essay where they argue that some neglected piece of art needs to be incorporated into the Western canon? And is this going to include white male students? Or is that going to be problematic because white male students arguing why a piece of art should be included into the Western canon is going to be seen as white men oppressively forcing their opinions on a class which was trying to escape the hand of white male oppression in the art world? And on that same note, this is Dr. Tim Berenger. Notice anything? Yeah, he's a white male, probably of European descent. Yale can't even properly decolonize a class when the entire point of that class is decolonization. Because that's the key word in this story, gang. Decolonization. The Intro to Art History class was retrofitted for its last run through to decolonize the art department, following decolonization efforts in, for example, the literature department at Yale. But this leads to the $64 question: what the heck is decolonization? Decolonization is a critical theory which maintains that minority people, in order to be truly free, must completely scrub out all traces of European/colonial power in their home countries, the process called decolonization. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but wait a minute. Europe really doesn't have a lot of colonies today. Independence movements blossomed in the 20th century, all across Africa and India, and for the most part, the European powers went home and gave their colonies independence. So, hasn't decolonization already happened? Yes, but decolonization as a critical theory teaches that this is not enough. In addition to colonial powers leaving, going home, and giving their colonies their independence, it is necessary for these former colonies to dismantle hidden aspects of institutional and cultural power, the very things that actually maintained colonial control. So for example, if a former colony, let's say just as an example in Africa, prefers English, or any European language, over their native language, if they prefer writing instead of oral communication, those two are still examples of colonization. Doesn't matter whether they're independent or not. In this light, the fact that English is actually now the international language of communication is problematic because this is seen as being a colonizing force on third world countries. But decolonization goes even further than that. In a piece that was published in the UK Guardian, Prayam Gopel argued that decolonization must also take place in the former colonizing powers. The reason is because minority people, women, blacks, gays, Muslims, etc., don't see themselves represented in Western society because by and large they don't see themselves reflected in the larger culture. And that's because in Western Europe, upper-class white men are seen as being at the top of the social ladder. They're the ones that society mostly focuses on. They're the ones who are going to be studied, they're the ones who are going to be courted, and they are the ones who are going to be made the standard of what is success, what is acceptable behavior, etc., and so forth. And this is a problem because, according to the National Council of Teachers of English, this is Western countries privileging white Western epistemology. Epistemology just being a big fancy philosophical word for knowledge and how human beings actually attain and acquire knowledge. And this is problematic because, according to Gopel, all knowledge is based on power relations. In other words, because Western countries focus on upper-class white men and make them pretty much the measuring stick for anything, again, according to decolonization as a critical theory, minority people are being robbed and deprived of power. Gopel argues that this problem can't be solved through simple diversification. No, only decolonization can fix this. Decolonization, where questions about gender, sexuality, ability, race, and class are raised, not only in education, but everywhere in society, to shatter the illusion of what Gopel calls the idea that we have a generic ID that we all share. And this process of decolonization reaches down to every single level. For example, Gopel argues that it's not just enough to have students read minority authors alongside the classics like Beowulf and Shakespeare. No, even traditional texts must be read with a decolonizing lens so that questions of sexuality can be raised in Frankenstein, for example, or questions about slavery and exploitation can be raised in Jane Austen's Mansfield Park. And that's just one example. Decolonization also happens when you argue that J.R.R. Tolkien's classic interpretation of the Anglo-Saxon poem Beowulf is actually racist. Decolonization comes when an English teacher absolutely refuses to teach her students Shakespeare because, quote, Shakespeare lived in a pretty small world. It might now be appropriate for us to acknowledge him as a chronicler of life as he saw it 450 years ago and leave it at that. As long as we continue to cling to one white man's view of life, as he lived it so long ago, we, perhaps unwittingly, promote the notion that other cultural perspectives are less important. And if you think that decolonization is just going to stick to the soft sciences, things like art, history, and literature, you better think again, because it is coming hard and fast now for the hard sciences. People are now calling, in all seriousness, for the decolonization of mathematics through such disciplines as ethnomathematics, which, quote, excavates the mathematics in cultural objects, artifacts, and practices, and critical mathematics, which, quote, is used to critique aspects of society, and where students critique mathematics, for example, how algorithms structure our lives in ways which reproduce inequality. Even physics isn't safe from this madness. Back on December 8th of 2019, the New Real peer review account on Twitter, an account that everyone should be following, just FYI, had a Twitter thread of screenshots that it had taken from a published physics paper wherein the author argued that Einstein's theory of relativity was undermined by not having an adequate representation of women. The author went on to say that physicists don't grapple with how the Atlantic slave trade, something that happened in the 17th and 18th centuries, colors and warps their biases today. Now, the ultimate root goal of decolonization is actually to erase any idea of certainty whatsoever. Peter MacDonald says that decolonization would ultimately lead to this conclusion because of decolonization's effects on language. MacDonald argues that inventiveness and translation are normal everyday things in a language, things that everybody does, which means that nobody can be said to own a language. No one person, no one group, no one civilization, country, or culture owns a language. This leads to the conclusion that language ultimately will mean whatever an individual wants that language to mean. And since language is the house of being, as we've said before here on the stone, this means that reality itself is only going to be what an individual person wants it to be, which means that nobody is going to be able to live with certainty or finality. What this all boils down to is that decolonization is the antithesis of civilization, and that you can have one, but you can't have the other. You can't have both at the same time. Today, when civilization isn't being trashed, it's only fuzzily understood, with a lot of people thinking that it's simply composed of a history, language, and culture of a specific people. Now, those things are definitely important, but at its root, in the words of the late great philosopher Roger Scruton, a civilization is actually a way that ordinary everyday people communicate and understand each other on a day-to-day basis. It's a way, as he put it, for people to see each other eye to eye and to therefore understand each other. Now, this point is crucial because it raises the fundamental question: how can we actually see eye to eye with other people? How can we actually connect with them to the degree that is needed for a civilization to actually start and then to actually continue to exist? Answer: we have to know ourselves. Now, that phrase is a cliche. I know, I acknowledge it, and I apologize. But here in this situation, it is totally appropriate. Think about it like this. If we have no clue who we are, if we're just blank slates with no idea of our heritage or our story, we're not going to be able to connect with anyone else. You guys are familiar with the old relationship cliches, right? Opposites attract, you should try to find someone who complements you, right? Well, both of those cliches, which are true in their own way, require that you know yourself. If you don't know yourself, if you don't know who you are, then you're not going to be able to find the opposite that attracts you, and you won't be able to actually find someone who complements you. How can you complement a blank slate? What is the opposite of a blank wall? It's nothing. Fortunately for us, we're not blank slates. We're part of a family tree, both of which help us to forge a core sense of identity. When we're actually allowed to know about our family and our family trees, looking at you there, Indiana, and on top of that, we are part of a society and a culture which, like ourselves and like our families and our family trees, did not just suddenly spring up out of thin air, but was actually forged by actual real people moving along through history. So to connect with people, both inside our society and culture and outside of those things, it's necessary that we actually understand our civilization, that we study it, so that we can have a better sense of where we came from and thus a better sense of who we are. And this raises another point. Every civilization in existence has a taproot. It has a heart, which makes it what it is and which separates it from every other civilization in the world. It's by tapping into and studying and absorbing this heart, this core of our civilization, that helps us actually with our own sense of identity and thus with connecting with people. If everything was always in flux, if, as MacDonald says, there was no certainty or finality to life, it would be impossible for civilizations to actually spring up and exist in the first place, because the world would be overrun completely with chaos. And civilizations, while they might be born out of chaos, cannot actually survive and thrive in chaos. Now, the irony is that advocates of decolonization trying to paint themselves as the defenders of these cultural and civilizational differences, when in reality, all they are defending is a drab and monolithic conformity. If everyone is really supposed to live as if there was no certainty or finality to life, if language and reality really were just up for grabs for whomever, then there would be absolutely nothing unique about any sort of culture, including the cultures that the advocates of decolonization are trying to protect from European colonialism. This point is reinforced when you argue, like Gopel does, that writers and authors of a specific civilization, society, and culture can be completely uprooted from their native spaces and transplanted to another civilization, with absolutely no more consequence than if you were simply replacing one Lego brick with another one. Now, art is one of the prime ways that the heart of a civilization can actually be seen and experienced. And in fact, I would go even one step further than that. I would argue that art very could well be the primary way to the heart of a civilization, because the whole purpose of art is beauty. Today, it's popular to say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But that sort of subjectivism means that a pile of garbage, a signed urinal, or a crucifix in a jar of piss is on equal footing with the Last Supper, or Michelangelo's David, or a Monet painting. Beauty is actually the melding of the immaterial and the material, with the 19th century German philosopher Friedrich Schilling defining it as the finite presentation of the infinite. To put that in plain English, it means beauty shows us the world as it's supposed to be. Not every guy out there looks, inside and out, like Michelangelo's David. I should know because I look at myself in the mirror every morning. But Michelangelo's David is the ideal to which every man should be striving for. In the same way, the ideal of boyhood, as Norman Rockwell showed it in his painting Springtime, is what every boyhood is supposed to be like. Now, the reason why beauty is able to show us the real in light of the ideal, to quote Roger Scruton again, is because, as the American philosopher D.C. Schindler says, beauty is the intersection of both the true and the good. Beauty appeals to our appetites because we are taking in what something actually looks like. We're taking in its appearance. But at the same time, beauty also appeals to our minds by screaming at us that it is actually beauty with a capital B, and demanding therefore an audience with our minds. So looking at a civilization's art, or lack of art, will allow you to compare what its ideas of the true and the good are with the actual true, capital T, and good, capital G. It gives you a peek into a civilization's soul. It gives you a peek into your soul if the civilization you're studying is your own. Which is why, to bring this video back full circle, Yale decolonizing its art department is actually a betrayal of its students, and of academia in general. Since the intro course this semester won't actually be teaching them Western art, it's not going to be showing and explaining the soul of Western civilization to those students. And that means they're going to have less of an idea when the semester ends of who they are as partakers of Western civilization, which means that they are going to have less of an appreciation for things outside Western civilization other than in the usual commercialized shallow way, which is totally worth $71,000 a year. But as usual, what say you? Does the Western canon in art, literature, etc. need to be expanded? And if so, how can this be done without completely gutting the soul of Western civilization? As always, let me know your thoughts, ideas, and opinions in the comment box below. Well, that about wraps up everything for right now, gang. As always, if you liked the video, whether you agreed with me or not, don't forget to show your support by leaving a comment, giving it a like, and sharing it on social media with your friends. And if you like the video, and you like videos about culture, politics, and religion, but from a different POV, then think about subscribing and ringing that bell for notifications so you'll always know when I post new videos like this every Tuesday. Videos you're not going to want to miss. As always, thank you for watching, for giving me a little bit of your day. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed to my channel. I appreciate you all. And I will see you here next week, gang, on top of the stone. Ciao.